Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Ori Quinn here at Ozark Holistic Center, and I had this idea. We're going to see if it works because I really like questions being asked to me. So I have Sarah here off camera. You can't quite see her, but she is going to be kind of pitching some questions to me. You'll hear her voice kick in, and so sometimes I'll be kind of staring at her, sometimes I'll be looking here. And then today in particular, I wanted to kind of go through and talk about or to take questions about our meal plan. It is something that is available on our website, so you can find it there and get it for free. It's a meal plan I use all the time with clients, and so there's just several different questions that get asked that came up. That I'd love to actually go over to maybe answer some of those questions. So here we go. Sarah's starting us out.
All right. So what sets your meal plan apart from others?
What sets ours apart? Yeah, so I went several years in practice before I created this meal plan. And in fact, I went after and used lots of other doctors' meals plans and their recipes. And I always kind of liked them, but didn't always love it. And because I don't love all the extreme levels of complete elimination of foods, and I want foods to be in there. And I came up with this idea of going through a diversified diet. And it came from running food sensitivity panels on clients and realizing that if someone's sensitive to a food and you eliminate that food for about 6 to 8 weeks, you can rerun that test, and most of the time the sensitivity is gone. So the immune system will respond and calm down its reaction to that food. So that kind of stimulated this idea of just doing a completely rotational based diet. So that brought the idea out, and I hadn't ever seen one like this or a rotational based diet before. Since developing this one and kind of looking more into that in terms of research, I now have found those, and that idea exists, and it's very much used for this reason. When people get oral tolerance issues where they just start having reactions to lots and lots of different foods, then you can go through and do this kind of diet and it'll help it. And so that's probably what sets it apart from your main ones like a keto diet or paleo diet or even vegetarian or vegan, is that we don't remove any particular food from the diet. We just we control how often you get exposed to that food, and I think that's the right way to go, because you want your gut to still know how to break foods down, and you want that diversity in the microbiome that comes from eating a large variety of different foods.
So you keep talking about this food sensitivity. Is that different than someone who has an allergy towards a food?
Yeah, so two different tests that can be run. Food allergy is what we would typically call an anaphylactic reaction to a food. So most people are aware if they have a food allergy. So peanuts, eggs sometimes, where you get the throat swelling, whole reaction. In the immune system, you have different ways the immune system can respond. That is what we call an IgE reaction. And in fact, that's how we test it for in the blood, is do you have an IgE reaction to peanuts? So there's several different antibodies that the body can produce. IgG, IgM, IgA are the most other ones that are the most common responses. And so those are what you test and look at in a food sensitivity panel. So in general, a food sensitivity reaction is more, I always say it's kind of more localized. It can have its effect in many different areas, but it's not that systemic full-blown response. So you see this a lot with gluten and dairy, where people, when someone comes to me and hey, I decided to go gluten-free and I felt way better, chances are they were actually having an IgA, M, or G response occurring to gluten at the digestive tract level, but they weren't having throat swelling, can't breathe, that kind of response.
So can someone who has a gluten or dairy allergy do this meal plan? Because I have noticed there are several things that do have either dairy or gluten in them.
Yes. So if we know that someone has a true allergy to dairy or gluten, the answer is no. And so we haven't created different versions that account for that. But what I can say, because of the rotation factor, where you only are going to consume dairy a couple of times in that week schedule, and then gluten I think is just once or twice as well, it makes it way easier for the individual to be able to swap that out. So If it's like a prominent aspect, right, we're having to replace it over and over and over again, that gets difficult. But like I know we use yogurt in there, for example, and so you can go to like a coconut yogurt or an almond-based yogurt, and you can do that swap kind of easier. Same thing goes for the gluten. I think the couple of times we do use gluten, you could swap them for. I think we use it in the wraps, so you could do it like a gluten-free wrap or something like that. But even if you have the sensitivity, that's the other thing to say there is, if you have the sensitivity, by decreasing it that much, where you're only getting exposed to it like once or twice a week, you don't really have to go through the full-blown like don't touch it for 6 week process. And so you will find, even that you know that you're usually quite reactive to these foods, if you're only getting at that level, you won't have those same reactions.
So then you talk about having this 40-40-20 balance. Mm-hmm. If someone is doing like those substitutions, does that mess up that balance at all?
Okay, yeah. It does. I almost actually cited that in the yogurt swap out. So overarchingly, because it's going to be the dairy that messes with the balances. So swapping a gluten like wrap or bread for gluten-free wrap or bread maintains a pretty similar nutritional profile of carbs to proteins to fats. It is the dairy place, and I actually see that a lot with clients that decide to remove dairy from their diet, or we realize they need to, or for whatever reason. And especially in America, dairy actually proves to be a pretty substantial protein source for a lot of people. And so taking something that has 8 grams of protein or more per serving, depending on what you're using, and switching it for your like coconut milk yogurt or your almond milk yogurt that has like 1 or maybe 2, is a pretty big potential loss of protein. In our thing, I'm with the well-roundedness of it. You're gonna not massively decrease your protein intake on the overall day, and so therefore in the overall week, but you will for that one meal, and that could prove to be important for somebody. So if they find that they eat that in the morning and they do the coconut milk yogurt or whatever, and it just doesn't seem to like last them till lunchtime, then we absolutely need to look at, we might have to actually remove that food and maybe use one of the other ones a second time.
Okay. Can you explain what that 40-40-20 balance is?
Yeah. So
and why it's important?
Yeah. So it's the ratio of carbs to proteins to fats, and it's a caloric ratio, and that's something that's important to know as well, because it's not grams, and so it's caloric. And so pretty much the premise of like in all the foods we have some ratio of what we call carbs, proteins, which is your like amino acid structures, and your fat structures. And so how much on a daily and then weekly basis of those are you getting? So we put it into that ratio 40-40-20, just really because it's a very well-rounded ratio. In general, in the American diet and like lifestyle, we lean really, really heavy carbohydrates, and that makes up the bulk of our calories. And so by looking at it by calorie, that really actually increases protein and fat more than people realize. Because I wish I knew these numbers off the top of my head, but when you actually look at like 1 gram of carbs and how many calories that is versus 1 gram of proteins, carbs and fats the most, and then carbs and then protein. And so in order to equal protein amount to carb amount, you have to actually consume quite a bit of protein. So it still gives you a really good amount of grams of protein per day.
So then what should the expected results of doing this meal plan be?
Yeah, so we have people that come in the office for all kinds of things. Digestive issues in general, like across the board, where people will be like, hey, I just get a lot of bloating, or I get diarrhea, or I get constipation, or I just feel very uncomfortable after I eat. So that would be a checkbox. I'd be like, yes. Any of those things, we're like, hey, come use this meal plan. We also have people that come in with blood sugar imbalances. And this is one that surprises people, because when you go out and read online right now, like the biggest push for blood sugar imbalances is leaning people towards more like paleo or keto, which is a much higher protein and with paleo percentage, or fat when it comes to keto percentage of that overall ratios that we just talked about. And so people often talk down on the carbohydrates because carbs convert to glucose so easily. But by balancing the individual meals and then balancing that protein and fat ratios involved, as well as for the most part, we use more complex carbohydrates. I'm a huge fan of going grains, like cooked grains, and not necessarily like just breads and those kind of things. You really improve the way the body responds to those carbs. So we use this meal plan as well to regulate blood sugar levels. So not to go too crazy there, but one of the problems you actually see with the paleo keto diets is that once people go on them and they stay on them and they're like, hey, my blood sugar levels are doing really well, they're fantastic, it's phenomenal, look how it like fixed my pre-diabetes or my insulin resistance or instability there. In the long haul, if you're on that meal plan for long enough, like 6 months or a year, and you ever decide you want to reintroduce carbohydrates, I guess you can just keep them out permanently if you want. If you wanted to like bring those levels back up, you can actually end up just in some real problems because you've like adapted the body away from how it's processing, how it's breaking down, how it's like using carbohydrates from that low carb intake for so long. And so you will actually see the body respond even more so to the carbohydrates and to that in terms of that glucose spikes and the insulin responses. And so they haven't seen in the research that like long-term use of a ketonic diet or paleo diet actually like alters the way the body responds to glucose or carbs. It just simply you're not intaking them, so it's not having to respond to them. So the premise of this and actually like rotating and diversifying is that you leave them in there, and so you're trying to like teach and train the body like how to break them down and how to like use them. And part of that actually for sure comes from the microbiome. So like the different bacteria types you have in your gut and what they do matters a lot. And so the longer you remove a food, the less of those bacteria types that help break those foods down you'll have, and the less enzymes your body produces in response to those foods. And so it can kind of be ramped up and it can be ramped down. And so I gotta come back to the original question, but and so in terms of like the blood sugar space, it actually does like really like help to like regulate blood sugar over a period of time using this diet, and that always surprises people. Um, so then we also use it for hormone balancing as well. So there was another question in between there, right? So your question was, what do we use it for, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So hormone balancing as well. So at like the top of the list, if someone thinks they have hormone imbalance, so like, hey, I feel like my hormones are really off, whether that be like just you can be tell but just because like cycle, like for women and like their cycle, and they've got odd things happening within that cycle, or a delayed cycle, or too often, or too much, whatever it be, all those different things. Or other hormone issues like thyroid imbalances or adrenal imbalances or whatever. It's pretty common people will come in and say, I really feel like this is related to my hormones. And it's interesting, but most of the time when people say that, it really is. We can we'll run hormones and figure out this really is related to your hormones. Protein and fat intake are like absolutely crucial, like not just crucial, like essential. Like if your protein or your fat intake is low, like your body cannot produce enough hormones. So there's certain so proteins are what we call proteins are a series of amino acid structures combined together to create a greater structure, which we call a protein. And so in terms of the digestive processes, the body has to break that protein down into its individual parts, or those amino acids. And we call them essential amino acids because your body cannot create them. There's certain ones it can, but there's a whole lot that it cannot. And so it has to consume them from food. That's like the only way it can get it. And the same thing actually goes for fats. And this is an important aspect because there's one essential fat from the omega-3 category and there's one essential fat from the omega-6 category. And nowadays, most of us just talk about the omega-3s. We're like, oh yeah, eat lots of omega-3s. They're so good, and they are, but we still can't ignore the omega-6 side. And so your body needs those essential fats and essential protein amino acids in order to create hormones. So if you don't consume enough of them, you will run low hormones. Like it just will happen. And so fats are more essential. So I'll start with proteins. So proteins are more essential for the hormones that are created in the brain, not only your neurotransmitters, but also like those that are created in the pituitary gland to stimulate the production of, you name it, thyroid, cortisol, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And so usually if that's where the problem lies, someone's not consuming enough protein. If people are having low of those end hormones of estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, thyroid, then it's usually a too little fat consumption. And we actually see this quite a lot. And it has to do, goes back to that ratio question of, because it's like a ratio thing. People feel like they maybe are overeating, or they're full all the time, or like they know they eat plenty of food, but then when you actually break down like what's in it, it's like, yeah, there's not enough of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this is called the 7-day meal plan. Do you do it for 7 days, or how long are you supposed to do it for?
Yeah, also a good question. So we threw this together because like really as a starting point. So in the meal plan, we present the different like reasons, like our principles upon which the meal plan works. So you can like read through those and like understand them and learn those. And then we created a schedule for a week that allowed you to like implement those principles of healthy eating, or the way we're looking at eating. And so the short answer to that is, you could technically use this meal plan like indefinitely if you really wanted to. And the hope is that by running through it for a week, and a lot of people end up using this anyways for longer than a week. I know a lot of my clients that like, they'll use their dinner meal, they'll use one of the lunch or dinner meals, and when they have extra, they'll eat it for lunch the next day, and that works. And so it kind of collectively turns it into more like 2 to 3 weeks of recipes. And so my hope with this was that it's a well-rounded enough and things that people want to eat and do eat, that you could create like an ongoing system with it. So you could use those things and keep going, or you could start plugging in different types of recipes based on those principles that you wanted to replace recipes that were in there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Time's up.
Time's up, huh?
I think that was over 15 minutes.